Hello, welcome to Security, Cryptography, whatever. I'm Deirdre.
I'm David.
And we have a special guest today. We have Professor Douglas Stebila with us today. Hi, Douglas.
Good morning.
Morning. Douglas is very rapidly agreed to join us after a new announcement from Apple about a post-quantum security upgrade to iMessage. And not just a post-quantum security message to upgrade to iMessage, but a whole bunch of upgrades to their iMessage protocol that have been updated in other secure messaging protocols. And now, Apple is just sort of rushing ahead of everybody on a whole bunch of fronts, and it's pretty interesting. We've invited Douglas to join us because he wrote a security analysis that Apple published as part of their announcement. And he was the first one to say, yes, I can jump on a call with you for an hour. For the record, we reached out to some people at Apple and they did not get back to us. So Douglas wins. So Douglas, can you tell us a little bit about, one, iMessage, and two, the changes that Apple has made to iMessage that you analyzed?
Yeah, so iMessage is Apple's, very large scale consumer instant messaging app and provides end-to-end encryption. And so the announcement on this week talked about their addition of post-quantum cryptography to iMessage. And so the cryptographic structure of the protocol that they announced is that it has a handshake and then a kind of double ratchet structure similar to we're familiar with in Signal. Mm-hmm. And so whereas it had been previously using Diffie-Hellman key exchange in the initial handshake and the asymmetric ratchet elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key exchange, mm-hmm. They've now added post-quantum chems there, specifically ML-chem.
And so they're using, I made sure to double check because in the post and the two papers, they had said different things in different places about whether they were using Kyber or ML-chem. And some people have basically confirmed it's all ML-chem. They just, I have a feeling they were working on this for a while. And so they started with Kyber and then they moved to ML-chem because that seems to be the case for a lot of parties. But anyway, they're using ML-chem 1024 for their post-quantum upgrades to their device keys or identity keys for part of the session initials handshake. And then one of the big things is they are including ML-chem 768 keys every so often when they do the ratcheting during the ongoing back and forth messaging conversation. And one thing that's interesting is Signal made a post-quantum upgrade recently, but just to their conversation setup handshake, not ongoing post-quantum updates to the ratcheting. And no one else has done any post-quantum updates to their ratcheting like this of any similar conversation that I've seen before, any sort of end-to-end messaging conversation. Apple is the first, but they're only doing it, if I'm correct, every 50 messages or at least every 7 days. I think they have a more complicated heuristic under the hood, but those are kind of the bounds of that heuristic. And they said that they're only doing that often because these ML-chem keys are so large on the wire and they just can't afford it. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right, Deirdre. So, ML-chem keys are, a couple, a key exchange with ML-chem is a couple of kilobytes of communication, whereas with ECDH, we're looking at 32 or 64 bytes. So there's a pretty big increase there. And so you have to kind of make a decision whether you want to pay that 2 kilobyte cost on every round trip that you do. And for chat messages where the message itself could be, a 2-character emoji or something, that's a pretty substantial overhead. So it's a choice to make. So what you described is my understanding that there's an amortization basically that they'll send during the asymmetric ratchet, they'll send ML-chem keys periodically. And I think that's a tunable parameter that they're able to adjust over time. But in the setup right now, what they've said is that it's every 50 messages or at least every 7 days, depending on how frequently the device is being used.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. I would be unfortunately, Apple has never released anything like a specification for iMessage. It's all been kind of reverse engineering how it works and having people like you kind of blessed to look inside the curtain and do an analysis and then release an analysis. So I would be very interested to look at it from like a protocol design perspective or an implementation perspective, where that tunable parameter lives and like how far is it exposed and stuff like that. But anyway, can you tell us a little bit about what you looked at to do your security analysis? And for those listening, Apple released Douglas's security analysis on their website, and we'll link to that in our show notes. And this is a straightforward, like, I'm a cryptographer. I'm modeling this as a security game. This is like game-based proofs. This is not some of the computer-aided cryptography proofs that we've talked about on this podcast recently. This is bread and butter. I'm sitting down, I'm using my brain, and I'm drawing up some security proofs sort of analysis. Can you tell us a little bit how you approached it?
Sure. So Apple gave me kind of their version of the design document and the protocol description.
Okay.
And so, I kind of translated that to the format that I understand, pseudocode in a paper in LaTeX. And so that's what's in the security analysis that I wrote for them that they released. And that's they kind of reviewed that my interpretation of what they gave me was correct.
Good.
And then I proceeded with the analysis from there.
Okay. So deduce security properties that they were trying to achieve, or did they say we are trying to achieve certain security properties? Please double check our work or something like that?
Yeah, they were very clear from the outset on the security properties that they're aiming for. So, post-compromise security or healing,
right.
Forward secrecy forward secrecy on both the asymmetric and symmetric ratchets, post-compromise security on the asymmetric ratchet, both post-quantum and elliptic curve assumptions for that part, and also confidentiality in the session key establishment, the initial handshake establishment.
So did you have some sort of tunable advantage when the post-compromise security and the forward secrecy stuff was being analyzed, given this heuristic of we're only updating our post-quantum security with these ML-Chem ratcheting keys every 50 or so, or up to 7 days, however that is measured in terms of advantage? How did you account for that sort of and it might, when it's literally so the original signal ratcheting double ratchet design is you send a new handshake Diffie-Hellman every, I send a message and my partner sends me one back. If they haven't sent one back to you in a while and you just keep sending them I saw this TikTok, I saw this TikTok, I saw this TikTok, that's where the symmetric ratchet comes in, and you're not doing the asymmetric ratchet. But when you finally complete another back and forth handshake, that's when you do an asymmetric ratchet. So that's a very deterministic way to analyze the post-compromise security and the forward security that the ratchet gives you. How do you analyze the sort of maybe it's every 50, maybe it's every 7 days. Who knows? How do you do that? Right.
So basically the model that I kind of gave of the protocol is actually kind of assuming that there's both ratchets happening, both post-quantum and elliptic curves happening in each step. And so that kind of simplifies the analysis. And then if you wanted to leave out one of the components, you could do so and extend the analysis. But the write-up that I have just focuses on both of them happening at once for simplicity.
Okay. Both of them happening at once. So did you kind of give sort of a bound on if it at least happens every 50 messages, that means blah? Or am I asking the wrong question?
No. So basically on the asymmetric ratchet, the analysis here is doing a post-quantum and elliptic curve exchange on every step of the asymmetric ratchet.
Interesting. So your sort of analysis is the ideal when this tunable parameter is cranked up to, we don't care about no stinking badges. We're just going to send them all the time, every time an asymmetric ratchet is appropriate.
Right.
So it sounds like, strictly speaking, what Apple is deploying, at least right now, and can be tunable later, is strictly below what you have analyzed in the paper.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Okay. Because like I'm not aware of like a nice measurable advantage of an adversary of like, oh, we only do ratcheting every 50 handshakes, and we only do ratcheting, and it could be somewhere between 50 and like a million, like whatever. So I was very curious if you had like pioneered a new sort of analysis or something like that, but that makes it a lot more obvious.
Yeah, you could do that. I think you'd have to kind of exchange extend the key exchange model to maybe give the adversary the chance to control how frequent that happens.
Okay.
And that introduces like a whole lot of extra bookkeeping and state management into the security experiment. But you could do it.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, how much time did you have to work on this?
So they reached out to me kind of middle of last year to start looking at it.
Okay. All right. So you had time. I'm just curious. One interesting thing is that the setup of the initial handshake has these 1024-bit MLChem keys, which are the highest security parameter that's being published by the standard, which makes sense. If you're going to root your stuff, sure, why not? This is ostensibly a one-time thing unless you completely reset your session, your chat session, or something like that. And then having something, the next step for these ephemeral, for these asymmetric ratcheting keys. One other thing that seems to jump out at me is that they explicitly call out that they're not doing any post-quantum authentication, like signatures, in this update. And this chimes with the PQ, the signal PQ extended Diffie-Hellman update that they did. They also have the original signal setup, and kind of similar with iMessage is you have an identity key pair or a device key pair that is associated with an identity. And you can both do that to do Diffie-Hellman, like, curve 25519 Diffie-Hellman. And then you can tweak that key pair and you can sign with it. And so if you're using what Signal uses, which is curve 25519, you can do this transformation and you can use a key pair to do the key exchange. And then you can use that same root of key material to sign with ed 25519 or something like that signature scheme. Apple uses the same thing. They're doing everything with P256, so it's ECDSA and stuff like that. But they ship their Apple devices with a key pair rooted in hardware. And so I completely understand why they are like, this is extremely valuable. We have a very, very trustworthy root of trust. Unfortunately, we can't go over to TSMC and just be like, just shove in MLChem roots of trust at the same time. Like that is way, 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 way years away from them doing that. So they do the session setup. They do their, ECDH part of the session setup with P56. They do their MLChem session setup with MLChem 1024. But they're signing with their root of trust key pair for ECDSA, and they don't have an equivalent for the post-quantum stuff. Did I get anything wrong? Does that sound correct?
I don't know about the hardware, the root of trust stuff, but yeah, you got the protocol description right as far as I know.
Yeah. In their blog post, they were like, they mentioned a couple of places where I'm just sort of like, oh, right. So my whole point of describing this is, one, they don't have post-quantum authentication stuff, which is just understandable. Like it's not a very...
No one has that.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Speaking of the guy who has to worry about this for the web PKI and his web browsers. But also that they have invested a lot into hardware optimization of like all of these things that are rooted in their secure enclave implementations, including P256, ECDSA, and, ECDH over P256 and stuff like that. And then they have this key material that's rooted in their devices, and they have this whole chain of trusted compute and trusted hardware, but it's all rooted in classical elliptic curve cryptography. And this other stuff, the new stuff, is all, I think, all in software, which makes sense. But it's also interesting from like from a security perspective of like, you've got these layers of like, you've got some real solid root of trust, but it's all classical. And then you're kind of layering on this post-quantum stuff that is all in software, and it kind of chains to this software update mechanism that also is root of trust, but it's all based on classical as well. And this is a little bit outside your brief, but like, I hope hardware-backed, high-optimized implementations of things like MLChem will get rolled out eventually. I don't know if they're going to get stamped into the silicon in, TSMC anytime soon, but if those high-efficiency optimized implementations get rolled out, that may have an impact on how frequently you can do the ratcheting, at least at a computational level. The transmission of bytes on the wire, Apple doesn't have a lot of control about how expensive that is for your battery, how long that takes. But that was just one thing that I kind of noted that like they mentioned in their post, they had like this scale. They had PQ1, PQ2, and now they're calling this PQ3. And I think PQ4 is where you will have this post-quantum authentication in there. So this is me just talking. I don't have a question here. I'm sorry. But to actually ask you a question, in your analysis, did you look at the lack of post-quantum secure authentication as it impacted the protocol or not?
No, so that was kind of outside the brief. The design criteria were for post-quantum confidentiality, but not post-quantum authentication. So, I think you speak to a lot of reasons why adopters are, doing post-quantum confidentiality first. I think your example on the whole hardware stack and roots of trust kind of speaks to the magnitude of this transition. Yeah. That there's so many different pieces that have to come into play. And even, a company that, controls a large part of its stack still has to take its time to get all of those pieces in place. Mm-hmm. And I think obviously as well, post-quantum signature schemes are still developing a bit more than post-quantum chems are with the continued NIST signature scheme on-ramp. Yeah. So the need is maybe a little bit less pressing as well because we don't have the same threat of store now, decrypt later attacks that we on authentication. That just doesn't make sense. Definitely.
Completely understand, it is a problem that we will eventually have to solve, and all of our options at the moment don't seem very attractive, and yet we will eventually have to solve it. And it's not that we're putting it off. It's just that we get to focus on we've got some chems. All right. We have a tool set that we're all right with. We have a very pressing, currently facing us problem because you can store everything that we're putting on the wire now and have been for years. And then just theoretically rifle through it when you've got a cryptographically relevant quantum computer come online and just point it at, your favorite thing and you're done. But it's not the problem doesn't go away anytime soon. So, okay. Some of the other cool things that I'm going to ask you about, and I don't know if you actually have anything to say about them, but I'm going to ask you anyway. One of the things that has been a topic for people in the area like myself is how you do hybrid combinations or whatever you want to call it for these shared secrets or chem combiners or whatever you're combining. So in this case, this whole protocol is not a fully PQ protocol. This is a hybrid design because they're keeping all this sort of elliptic curve based stuff that we talked about and adding this hybrid stuff, post-quantum stuff onto it. If it was just all post-quantum asymmetric primitives, we would just call it fully PQ. But technically, this is hybrid. And so when you're doing this hybrid stuff, you kind of got a range of options about how to smush the things together. Can you tell us a little bit about how they are combining the shared secret key agreement from classical and the shared secret key agreement from the post-quantum stuff and smushing it together and getting security out of it?
Right. So in the iMessage PQ3 protocol, there, especially let's focus on, say, the asymmetric ratchet. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of 3 pieces of input keying material, or up to 3 pieces of input keying material. There's the chaining key from your previous stage or from the initial handshake. Mm-hmm. There's a new ephemeral Diffie-Hellman shared secret, and there's potentially a new MLChem post-quantum shared secret. Mm-hmm. And so from those 3 pieces of input keying material, we want to derive a new chaining key and from which we can derive the next stages and the next message keys. So the approach that they used was to kind of use HKDF extract, which is really just HMAC, a 2-input function, to smash those together. So they put one piece of keying material in the HMAC key input and the other piece of keying material in the HMAC message input. And so they do that once to accumulate together the chaining key and the ECDH shared secret, and then another time to accumulate that intermediate value with the post-quantum shared secret. And then from that result, then you apply HKDF expand as a PRF to expand out a bunch of keys from there.
And in the HKDF expand slot, in the label, they have a ton of session contextual transcript material. And we love this. If you can afford to do it, if it's computationally affordable to you, just shoving everything public in your session handshake transcript in there is just like, we love that. And we love that because it means that you get the session independent stuff. No one can like swap a doodle your, encapsulated shared secret for another one. And if all these nice things come out of just shoving all that stuff in there. So I'm very happy. I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, I'm a fan of, I'm of the philosophy to hash everything in if you can. So I was glad to see that. I think in key exchange protocols, there's this trend for a bit of time trying to be clever and leave things out. And you can prove security, but it's a little bit more fragile, right? And you have to be careful and make sure if you change something or you move to a different model or a different primitive, you have to make sure that it really goes through properly. Whereas if you hash everything in, there's less risk.
Yes. When we weren't sure if they were using Kyber, if they were using MLChem, they are using MLChem, blah, blah, blah. This would be quite relevant is that if you are changing the chem you use later, because different chems have different binding properties to their encapsulation key, to the ciphertext, to, yada, 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 about like how much guarantee you get from the shared secret that comes out the backside of your chem and how closely it's like, you cannot get this value if you use a different public key or if you use a different ciphertext or have a different ciphertext. So the fact that they're binding all of the stuff into their KDF means that doesn't matter, that they have a lot more ability to swap those chems out because they're literally committing to everything related to that chem. And so it doesn't matter. They can change things around in a much more agile way, which seems to be a bit of it's agile. Crypto agility is coming back, but in a different context. It's kind of breaking my brain.
Are they committing to the actual algorithm used somewhere, feeding in the name of?
Gosh, let's see where it's invoked up here because it's used several times.
The chems
we've
and so on.
We've got ID. We've got the label for the ratchet. We've got the public key, the elliptic curve public key. We've got the post-quantum ciphertext, the post-quantum public key. I think they are. Because they're committing to a bunch of identifying material, not just the key material. But I need to go double check anyway. I would be surprised if they weren't. One interesting thing about this kind of nested HMAC KDF that they've put together, they call it KDF RKCK because it is the whole KDF they've designed. They take the sort of root key. If you have a root key, you have this elliptic curve shared secret. You've got the chem shared secret, and you've got all this contextual session information. They call it SID. And then you do this computation on the inside, and it spits out your RK and your CK, and those are the two different ratchet keys. Is that what those are?
Yeah. So the root key is the one that continues on the asymmetric ratchet, and the CK is the one that's fed down into the symmetric ratchet.
Awesome. Okay. This is an interesting approach because I've seen a lot of different approaches of how you take two different secrets and you throw them through a KDF and then you just have a value out the end. And then you either just split it down the middle and use like the first, half of the bytes for some other purpose and then half of the bytes for another purpose. And you might shove those through more KDFs or something like that. This one is my first naive approach to doing something like this is I would concatenate all this information together, your chem shared secret, your elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman shared secret, your session information, your transcript information, concat it all together and shove it through HKDF, which is what they use internally. They didn't do that. Do you have any notions about why they didn't do it that way and they did it this way instead?
So I don't, have insight from their side. We see this pattern elsewhere. So the TLS 1.3 key schedule kind of also combines, the pre-shared key with the Diffie-Hellman shared secret using 2 arguments of HKDF extract. So we've seen this design pattern before.
Okay.
So I have thought about this a bit. And when you do it this way, it allows you to model HKDF as a dual PRF.
Yeah.
So you really have a 2-input function and you're asking it to be a PRF in its 2 kind of distinct inputs. And there's subsequently been, some security analysis specifically of the dual PRF property of HMAC. There's a Crypto 2023 paper by Backendahl, Bellare, Gunther, and Scarlata. So that's a very kind of well-defined specific property you're making of assumption you're making of HMAC. Whereas concatenate and just hash, if you're in the random oracle model, then great.
Right.
It's fine. But otherwise, you're less clear on where the different parts of the secret are in the hash function input, whether it's going across a block boundary. It feels like you're being a little bit less specific on that, and you're making a variable length assumption as well on kind of where the secret stuff is within the input.
That's interesting because I'm a part of a team that's working on a different hybrid chem called X-Wing, and part of that is literally concatenating a bunch of stuff together and shoving it through SHA-3. But to your point about where is the secret material and the block boundary and all sort of stuff, our team has done very specific analysis about this length of bytes, where the key material is, how many rounds of KECAC inside SHA-3 are being used to parse this material for both performance reasons and for security reasons. This analysis indicates to me that it allows you to use HMAC/HKDF and HKDF extract and HKDF expand in a slightly higher level of abstraction without having to do how many rounds of the internal cipher block function of this hash function that I'm using as my KDF and how long is my it allows you to almost achieve a similar thing, but with a nicer, safer to use, higher level of abstraction. Neat.
Yeah, it is a higher level of abstraction. I think you still have to really be careful about judging whether HMAC satisfies this. It hadn't really gotten very much attention until last year's paper.
Yeah.
And the last year's paper that I mentioned from Crypto 2023, there are a lot of subtleties to it because HMAC does some interesting things and I can't remember all the details, but if the key is less than a certain length, then the key is used raw. If the key is longer than a certain length, it's hashed first. And there's a few extra little details in there. So it's a subtle analysis, and sometimes the lengths do matter.
Okay.
So there's a lot to be careful about here in how you do, the key derivation in dual PRFs and hybrid combiners.
Okay. That's very good to know because there's a discussion about trying to make a draft about how to do hybrid chem combiners and recommend it to things like IETF. And I've had that paper on my sort of queue, but then I saw this in the Apple thing and I was like, oh, this is very relevant to my interest. And then I didn't detect that subtlety just from a cursory, just sort of this is neat. Maybe this is another option. Maybe we'll just try it like this. And it's okay, there are other subtleties to doing it this way too. Okay. Thank you. I need to read that. Okay. One thing that I noticed, or someone noticed when looking at this protocol update, is the lack of deniability in this update to iMessage. If I'm Apple, I don't think they care about deniability, but there are other very similar end-to-end encrypted messaging protocols like Signal that do seem to care about deniability. Can you tell us a little bit about what cryptographic deniability is and why some people care and why apparently Apple and iMessage don't care?
So I can tell you what cryptographic deniability is. I can't tell you
Sure.
what Apple's opinion is on it. So cryptographic deniability is the idea that when you participate in a protocol exchange, that exchange should not produce any kind of output that can be transferred to another party and be used to verify something that occurred during the protocol execution. So either it can't be used to confirm that a particular party said something during a protocol execution or even participated in a protocol execution. And so kind of this dates back at least to the off-the-record messaging protocol, OTR, which is, in some sense an ancestor to many of our chat protocols today. And it had OTR had a form of cryptographic deniability because the two main things that gave it that were that it used Diffie-Hellman for authentication rather than signatures. And then from that shared secret, use MACs to authenticate messages. And so first off, either because it's a symmetric key in a MAC, either party could have generated a MAC tag. And so you can't prove that the other person said something. And then there are no signatures, so you kind of don't have that as well. And OTR, I think, even went so far as to release the MAC keys at the end of the conversation so that they could really, argue, hey, the key is out there. And in fact, if you download OTR, you get this tool to forge a transcript. So take it with a huge grain of salt.
But for me, we've come so far in the deployment of end-to-end encrypted messaging protocols in the world where it's actually deployed by your WhatsApps or Facebooks and honestly, your wide scale signals. We've gone so far the other way, away from deniability. For example, Facebook released full support for end-to-end encrypted Facebook messaging chats. It used to be opt-in and now it's on by default. And they have a whole bunch of stuff that allows you to report a message to Facebook and for Facebook to authenticate that Facebook sent that message that was end-to-end encrypted, that they sent it, they couldn't read it, but now you are reporting the decrypted message and, a tag that was on the encrypted message to Facebook to be like, someone's being a dick to me or harassing me on Facebook Messenger. I'm reporting them to you. And Facebook has very explicitly put extra cryptographically safe, but extra stuff in here that's the opposite of deniability. It's someone sent something and we, Facebook, ferried it from point A to point B and someone received it and decrypted it. And now we are able to check all of those things. Who wants deniability except cypherpunks?
I desperately want to see deniability tested in court at some point. I want a court case that has a forged OTR.
Yeah, I've wondered about that too. And there are a couple things that I thought of that I wanted to mention about this. So there was this talk last year at RWC on deniability in messaging. And we have this notion of cryptographic deniability, but what does it mean in the real world? And is it actually promised in the real world, even if you have a deniable protocol signal or OTR?
Yeah.
So this paper by Collins, Colombo, and Huguenin Dumatin, so they argue that for deniability, you have to consider the context in which the protocol is running. Right. So maybe the core chat protocol is deniable, but then it's running in some kind of there's a separate layer above that authenticates the users to the server or something like that. Right. So all of that could be undermining cryptographic deniability. And then, as David said, we have no idea how this would play out in a court, right? The legal system has, for centuries, had its own way of assessing credibility of evidence long before digital signatures were a possibility, right? In fact, there was a paper at S&P last year as well, touching on this question just a little bit. So some researchers from University of Maryland, they did this study where they had 1,200 users across 600 user studies, where they asked how non-expert users would perceive deniability of chat messages in a courtroom setting. So how likely are you to convict if you are told that if a cryptographer comes in and tells you that it's cryptographically deniable, or if you see that the chat program includes a function to edit the messages or tamper with screenshots or whatever. So I think we're starting to touch just a tiny bit on what deniability, cryptographic deniability really means, but I don't know really what it means.
Okay, Deirdre, we're going to need you to do some crimes and then leave evidence in OTR, and then we'll create some forged transcripts and send you through the U.S. justice system and write a paper about it.
Well, so one other thing on this. So we have seen like court cases where chat messages have been evidence. And I'm thinking, among others, of EncroChat in Europe, which was a chat program used by organized crime and so on. And, law enforcement infiltrated this, and that evidence has been used in convictions and so on. And the chats there contain all kinds of corroborating evidence, like a selfie of someone holding a bag of cocaine, or like someone, and I think this is true, someone holding a block of cheese, and you can see the fingerprints from their fingers holding the block, like that are in the picture, they're holding the block of cheese, right?
Oh,
so there's
wow.
all this corroborating evidence, regardless of the metadata of the chat.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Oh, God. I could see someone be like, oh, right, this is like a picture of my passport for backup. And then be like, but the transcript is deniable. It's just like, okay, all right. Yeah, it kind of reinforces, like, it's a cute cryptographic trick, but I think the end user demand for deniability has only decreased over time. But it seems funny that cryptographers are like, there's no deniability here? Oh, no. And I'm like, why would there be? But actually, on the other hand, Apple might be one of those parties that actually kind of is like, no, like nothing to see here. We're not going to like, we care about your privacy. We care about all this sort of stuff. They might be one of those parties that are like, yes, you cannot, but they're also just a large company. I don't know.
The EU, just to rampantly speculate, the EU does care a lot about trust and safety, and deniability and trust and safety in general don't play nice with each other.
I know there's nothing in your analysis, Douglas, about the padding that they added to iMessage, which is basically like a privacy win. I don't know if other messaging protocols have something similar, or if they're just sort of just doing the maximal padding by default anyway. But basically, this is like another way to avoid a completely different class of attack, which is just sort of like looking at the different sizes of the ciphertext on the wire to get some information about what's actually being encrypted. And so to counteract that, you use this, this is a padding heuristic, which literally makes it so that that information that is being leaked by the size of the ciphertext on the wire is much, much, much smaller. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can't. I didn't take a look at that.
All right.
So basically, my focus was on the key establishment, right? The key exchange,
okay, right.
Not the authenticated encryption or anything for message transmission.
Okay, sorry.
So I didn't take a look at Padme. But it looks promising.
Yes. This is sort of like yet another thing that is just, iMessage has been a little bit of iMessage came out the gate when Apple released it as like a pretty good, groundbreaking, or at least for like wide scale messaging protocol, encrypted messaging protocol. It wasn't documented very well, but it was considered pretty good at the time. And then it's been kind of stagnant. People have analyzed it. People found some breaks. They fixed some breaks and things like that. Signal has like screamed ahead. WhatsApp adapted Signal. WhatsApp's had their own advancements and then Signal has been an influence to a lot of end-to-end encryption protocols, not just messaging, in a lot of places. And iMessage has just been kind of plateaued, I would say. And then all of a sudden, they've got post-quantum, and they've got more post-quantum stuff than anyone else has. They've got this much better padding for privacy. They've got a whole bunch of stuff going on in here all at once. I don't have a question here, but it's just kind of good. It's good to see, because iMessage kind of was a big leader to start, and now they're coming all the way back after being, somewhat quiet for a long time. And it's pretty good to see. And I'm glad that they basically reached out to people like you. And there were some other, there was another team that did a Tamarin analysis, and I have to go through their analysis. And I want them to release their Tamarin model. I was grepping in their paper for a Git link or something, and there isn't one. So I have to dig a little bit harder, and I would like to to take a look at that. And someone did an audit of the code. They were not named, just that an audit happened. So, all right. But that is also good. Oh, and the other thing is a couple of months ago, they announced their contact key verification thing. And that came with key transparency logs. And for us nerds, like this is like a big thing because did WhatsApp do that first? Or did I forget? Okay, David's nodding at me. I think WhatsApp did similar, a slightly different design, but they did a similar thing first. And basically the contact key verification or key verification stuff is about when we talked about setting up your sessions and you have these long-term keys that might be per device or per identity or, whatever it is. Those are long-term and you really want to know when they change because like you have to start your, you have to restart your session and things like that. In the long distant past of messaging, encrypted messaging, it was just sort of like, here's a code, here's an encoding of someone's public key. And maybe you like compare codes to make sure that you're both seeing the same thing. And that it was relying on you to check that out of band. So like in the distant past, this might actually involve someone at some data center calling you and be like, read me off the hex encoding of your, SSH public key, which I had to do back in the day. And then Signal and WhatsApp literally had like a little QR code and you like do that out of band, blah, blah, blah. So this contact key verification stuff and the equivalent WhatsApp one was literally doing it for you. It was WhatsApp or Apple or whomever is running the service watches all the public keys that are being verified, has these logs that anyone can check to keep track of the changes of these public keys, and then prompting you, the user, if they notice something is wrong, if they notice a public key being advertised from a party that shouldn't be, because WhatsApp or iMessage or whatever knows the trusted public-private or the trusted public keys from trusted devices that it knows. And so it can catch, or any of these logs can catch. It doesn't have to be by the service providers, but they're in the most advantageous position to operate this. They will notice if David Adrian's device, which is showing me a hash of a public key that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, but the cache of the public key that I'm seeing on my device is actually 4, 5, 6, 7 or something like that. And they will notify me. So that's the whole thing. They did that too. They did that a couple of months too. And basically it seems to be I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was the largest deployment of key transparency logging, period, because they have so many devices. I think the Apple one was bigger because they just turned it on. I think they only turned it on by default. And the WhatsApp one is like slightly smaller for reasons, and I don't remember why. But it's literally billions versus billions.
Yeah, I believe that Apple's users times average number of Apple devices is bigger than total number of WhatsApp users, since it's just one key per user on WhatsApp.
That might be it. But yeah, anyway.
My understanding is also that Apple launched PQ3 and the key transparency at the same time, and then just being Apple didn't tell people about it.
No, I think key transparency came out in an earlier version of iOS.
Yes.
17.2, and now we're on, and I think they said post PQ3 will come out in 17.4. 4?
Yeah.
So, which we're not at yet.
Yeah.
Although I also was fiddling around with contact key verification yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
And I had to go and turn it on. So I don't know if it is on by default or maybe I just screwed up a setting, but I had to turn it on at least.
I think for Apple, this started as high-risk users, whatever their official name is for like, if you think you're a high-risk target, like turn on all of these features, including contact key verification or whatever. And now they're rolling out contact key verification for basically everybody, but I do think you have to turn it on. And I think in WhatsApp, they have set it up so that it is on by default because they're literally doing we're doing all this work on the back end so that only when we give you a prompt or a flag or, whatever, you have to do anything or whatever, just not even do anything, just not message somebody or something like that. I think that's what it is. And it may literally just be, it's harder for Apple to turn this on by default for so many heterogeneous devices and operating systems, because they're doing this stuff for iOS, iPadOS, macOS, watchOS, blah, 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 blah. They have a heterogeneous environment, and WhatsApp is just like, we have an app. They have iOS, they have an Android app, they have WhatsApp web, which is tightly bound to those other apps. So I think they have an easier time turning it on by default than Apple does. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did eventually.
All of those are bound to a single phone number, though. Like, you don't have two instances of your WhatsApp at the same time.
You don't? I have to remember how they handled this, actually, because I think they evolved it.
You can do web and a phone at the same time, but I don't think you can have two separate phones.
I think you might be changing it, but you might be right. But yeah, TLDR, yeah.
If anyone with inside knowledge of Apple wants to come on and wear a max headroom mask and use a voice changer, we'd be happy to talk to you.
We would love if you just like quietly gave us the inside scoop, but I think everyone is like sworn to secrecy by Apple Incorp. But yeah, like TLDR, iMessage on a wide scale has gone from pretty stagnant, like okay, but hasn't really changed much in a long time, to changing a lot in about 6 months, or at least from our public vantage point. The contact key verification was October. This is February. It's been a lot of awesome stuff being rolled out all in one go. It's very cool to see. And they're now at the front of the game in terms of the most post-quantum resistant end-to-end messaging protocol, because they're including these post-quantum ratchets. Not every asymmetric ratchet, but at all. No one else is doing that right now. No one else has deployed that to their users right now. So that's awesome. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we want to cover. Douglas. I looked at Signal's post-quantum extended Diffie-Hellman pretty closely. Have you looked at that significantly to be able to compare and contrast how iMessage does its post-quantum hybrid session setup versus the Signal version? Not the extra ratcheting stuff, just the setup of the session.
Right. It's been a while since I looked at it, so I don't remember the full details of how it went. Right. So they have in the handshake, they're doing a post-quantum chem. I think they're just doing with ephemeral keys. They don't have long-term identity keys there?
I think they do. So now,
they do.
Yeah. So now it's the post-quantum variant long-term key, the post-quantum pre-keys or whatever, and the classical long-term keys and the classical pre-keys, and they're all smushed up there together, I think. And yeah, all the pre-keys and all of that stuff are signed classically with the long-term classical ID keys.
Right. So it looks like the PQXDH has a bunch of one-time post-quantum chem pre-keys, and then also a last resort one.
Yes.
That they call it if there are no more one-time ones available.
Yes. And that last resort may be used repeatedly if they haven't refreshed the other pre-keys.
But no identity keys in the post-quantum chem.
So in iMessage PQ3, they don't have a long-term ML chem. They just have a strong session setup ML chem, but their ID key is still their hardware rooted elliptic key pair or something like that. Okay. I didn't pick up on that. That's cool. And actually they seem very similar except for the KDF.
Yes, it looks like the Signal PQXDH key derivation function concatenates the 3 or 4 Diffie-Hellman shared secrets, and then also the post-quantum shared secret after that. And then runs that through the key derivation function itself, which is, it says HKDF. Mm-hmm. And I guess that would mean HKDF extract, and then there's an expand after that?
Yeah, the standard, just one after the other. And I think the only other kind of note is that Signal's extended Diffie-Hellman gives these sort of implicit authentication things to this that I think the iMessage session setup doesn't have. So the iMessage session setup is signing a bunch of stuff with their ID key, or whatever, the transformed equivalent of their P256 ID key. Signal does that too, but they're also doing this triple Diffie-Hellman that they've been doing for a long time. So they have a Diffie-Hellman between their ID key and a pre-key, and vice versa. So the other party between their ID and the other person's pre-key, and then between these two pre-keys as well. And they're doing those are the triple Diffie-Hellmans, which have been a part of Signal for a long time. And then they add in this ML-Chem between these pre-keys for the post-quantum variant. And then they concat those all together and smush them through their KDF. So right. Can you tell us a little bit about the authentication properties that these extra Diffie-Hellmans give us they just don't happen to be present in iMessage, and I don't think they ever have been.
Right. So in Signal, the authentication of a session or messages from that session, of the session is done using implicitly authenticated key exchange. Right. So there are these long-term Diffie-Hellman keys, and we compute a shared secret, and only you and I should be able to compute that shared secret. So no one else has that. That's implicit authentication.
Got it.
Then from that, if we derive a MAC key or something and we use that, then you subsequently explicitly authenticate a message tagged under that MAC.
Okay.
That's kind of the main idea from which cryptographic deniability comes from as well. Whereas in the iMessage protocol, the long-term keys are signing keys, not Diffie-Hellman keys, and they use them in a signature scheme, not in a key exchange.
Mm-hmm. So besides the deniability part, why is this attractive beyond signing things with your long-term ID key? Because that's what iMessage has. And that gives us some amount of authentication that we are talking with someone who controls this long-term ID key to start the session. Why is this extra implicit authentication attractive when we already have these signatures over a lot of this stuff that is bound to our long-term ID key, for example?
So if you're doing implicitly authenticated key exchange with long-term Diffie-Hellman keys, you can do extra combinations, ephemeral with long-term or vice versa. And this can increase the resistance to certain type of compromise attacks. So there's this security model paper for key exchange called the Extended Kinetic Crosscheck paper, ECK. And what this model says is that, so we know forward secrecy, that's it should be secure if your long-term key is revealed afterwards. Mm-hmm. But in ECK model, and with these many combinations, you can also have, security against randomness reveal. So if your random number generator is bad or somehow revealed, then if you also did a static Diffie-Hellman, and you did that static Diffie-Hellman using well-generated, safe static Diffie-Hellman keys, because maybe they're in a hardware root of trust or something, then you at least still have that basis of confidentiality, even if all your ephemeral keys were bad.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, because I think I knew something about that once upon a time when I first learned about triple Diffie-Hellman or whatever. And I literally was like, why do we do this again? I was like, okay, it's basically, it's not just quote robustness, but it's different kinds of robustness all throughout the protocol. And it's efficient enough, whether it's efficient enough to throw these big chems on the wire to do the same thing, just do I've got my long-term chem key pairs and I've got my ephemeral chems. I'm just shoving 6 kilobytes on the wire to do it. We'll see. But thank you.
Yeah, and if you're really sensitive with bandwidth, there is one more benefit to doing chem-based authentication rather than signatures, is that, post-quantum chems are a little bit smaller than post-quantum signatures.
Yeah.
So you can save a little bit bandwidth, at least with our current post-quantum chems and our current post-quantum signatures. You could save a little bit of bandwidth with implicitly authenticated post-quantum key exchange rather than explicitly.
Yeah. There's definitely some protocols that currently really rely on signatures, and I'm taking another look at them and be like, what if all chems? Oops, all chems. And I might talk to you more about that later. Douglas Stebila, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for letting us ramble about things that you did not look at all, but try to answer our questions anyway.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Security, Cryptography, Whatever is a side project from Deirdre Codley, Thomas Tachek, and David Adrian. Our editor is Nettie Smith. You can find the podcast online at SCWPod and securitycryptographywhatever.com, and the hosts online at Durham Crestolum, at TQBF, and at David Adrian. You can buy merch at merch.securitycryptographywhatever.com. If you like the pod, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you rate your favorite podcasts. Thank you for listening.